perpetual fear on doing a podcast is forgetting that piece.
Cool.
So, all right. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing and Product Strategy at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. I am absolutely thrilled to have on our show Mike Mace, VP of Market Strategy for UserTesting, experienced Silicon Valley tech leader with small companies you might have heard of, like Apple and Palm, and also author of Map the Future. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. We're thrilled to have you. We actually have done quite a different things with user testing and are really big fans of what you guys do. And of course, that real focus on the user and the markets. And one of the things I really want to talk to you about, Michael, is I know that you have spent some time as an organization and you particularly tracking the pandemic and how that relates to what's happening today. And in some ways, I think it's like, oh, it's a pandemic. But if anything I have learned from the pandemic, Mike, is it feels like I should just not plan, right? Like all good plans will just go away. But of course, as product people, we can't do that, right? That's our job. Yeah. Roadmaps, product plans. And so I think really sort of trying to take off the layers of this and understand how do we do planning? How do we create plans in a time of COVID? How do we get inside the heads of our users and see how what is happening today affects the problems they have and the product offerings we should have? So that's what I'm hoping to do. But I dived in really quick. First, let's back up a little bit, Mike. Give the listeners a little bit about your background and a little bit about user testing.
Sure. Well, you already did a great background on me, so thank you very much for that. User testing, for people who know the company, they usually know us as a way to test UX stuff. So, I've got a new design for the checkout flow on my website. Let me run a quick user test to see how people go through that. And, we do that sort of testing. And the way it works is we've got a big bunch of huge collection of panelists that you can select from. You can choose demographics and job titles and things like that. You can ask them to do a task. Their screen gets recorded. Their voice gets recorded as they explain what they're doing, and you get that back. However, that same system can be used for a lot of other types of feedback as well. And in particular, relative to the pandemic, what we've been doing is just tracking what people say about what they're going through. So instead of asking them to do a usability test, we say to them, hey, how worried are you about the pandemic? And what activities are you avoiding? And how scared are you of doing XYZ? And we've been doing that since the beginning of the pandemic. So we started last April. We've been doing it every quarter. We've been pairing that also with quant surveys, so that we could get exact numbers on how people respond to questions like how many of you are afraid of flying on an airplane or shopping in a store or something like that. So it gives us this nice mix of here's numerically what's going on, plus here's the motivation behind it. And the goal is both to understand what's happening now, but especially to get inside the heads of customers so we can anticipate what they might do in the future. Nobody can predict the future, not me, not anybody else. I don't want to oversell what you can do with any sort of research, but the idea is to learn how people are thinking well enough that you can anticipate how they will respond as things change. So it's all about being prepared for the possibilities so you can jump on them super quickly. And that's what we've been trying to do around COVID lately, is to understand what are the possibilities? What are people thinking right now? And therefore, as things change, what should we be anticipating could happen next?
Great. One of the things I love about this use of kind of getting user feedback and user testing is the emotional aspects that you capture. Yep. I think that's such a powerful part of understanding our users and how we create products and experiences that really relate to them and connect. And I think sometimes that is not elevated enough when we do testing. So I just think a great part of this as well.
Great, I agree.
So let's dig into some of that, right? So let's first start with what are some of the findings that you found? What are the kind of big themes from the research that you've done?
Yeah, so let's start with kind of a baseline, and then we can kind of move into when and how things are likely to change. So, first of all, around the world, and by the way, the latest round of this that we did was not just in the US, it was US, UK, Australia, and Singapore. And somebody always wants to ask about the quantitative side of it, like what was your sample size? So we were 1,000 people in the U.S. We were about 500 each in UK and Australia. We were a little bit smaller in Singapore because it's a smaller population. So this is going to be good to within about 3 or 4 percentage points in terms of the numbers. And this was done at the end of December, literally the last week of December. So it's quite fresh. Number one, across those countries, overall anxiety about the pandemic is about the same, and about 70% of people say they are somewhere between moderately and very deeply concerned. So, pretty high concern level. There are not a lot of people statistically who are blowing it off, despite much what you might hear about on Facebook or something like that. Most people are really still quite worried and quite concerned, and that hasn't changed a lot throughout the pandemic. Um, we have been tracking how people feel about doing particular things in public. A whole big list of activities like riding a plane, shopping in a store, et cetera, et cetera, getting your hair cut. Um, and what we found is that people's fear level depends on the level of trust that they have around that activity. So the more that they think it's possible to sanitize a particular location, the more that they trust that the people running it will know how to sanitize it, the more that they trust that they're actually going to do it, and the more control they have over their own exposure. Can they leave? Can they move away from people? The more comfortable they feel. Um, so, flying on an airplane, very scary. Because I'm trapped on that airplane. I can't move away from people. I don't necessarily trust that with the rapid turnaround on flights that they're going to really sanitize everything. Same thing for riding on public transit for all those reasons. On the other hand, going to a doctor's office, believe it or not, a little bit lower, actually not a little bit lower, a substantially lower fear level, even though um, you would think, hey, people are sick people go to doctors. I don't want to go to a doctor's office. That's definitely there. But there's such a high level of trust that doctors know how to sterilize things and that they're going to do so, that makes people actually more comfortable in those settings than they are in some of the less controlled settings. Um, the other thing that we've been seeing over time is that uh, the fear of specific activities, as we've been tracking these things, has been gradually dropping. So people are less afraid of shopping in a store now than they were last spring. And that applies across most things, not really public transit and a couple of the other really scary ones like airplanes. But for a lot of things, people are not as frightened of doing those activities as they were previously. And I think that's kind of acclimation. They've gotten used to the situation, they know how it works, they've had a chance to see that the people running those venues have been figuring out how to sterilize things and how to protect their customers, and as a result, they're slowly getting used to the idea of going there. Now, it's not return to normal lifestyle, especially for a lot of people, because they're still very frightened, um, but it's more willingness to do these activities. What that means to companies is if you're doing anything that involves interacting with people directly, the more you can do to show them how you're protecting them, how you're keeping it clean, how you've thought through the process of protecting them, the more likely you are to get some business back now before the pandemic even completely goes away. So don't let up on that conversation of here's how we protect you. That is still something that people are watching really, really closely. And it is the key to getting business back prior to the end of the pandemic.
I think that's a really interesting point too, because I think sometimes we get tired of telling people, like we're like, we've been talking about this for 8 months, right? We don't need to
Yep.
keep going. And I think it's still at the time it comes up an important thing to hit, an important thing to be proactive about, right? So that
Yep.
it's not waiting until they ask you about it. It's telling them up front that you've
Yep.
got this covered and that it matters to you as it matters to them.
It's a way of saying that you love your customers, right? And nobody ever gets tired of hearing people say "I love you," and that's what you're really saying when you're describing how you're taking care of them.
So that gives, I think, is an excellent set. And I love that you had such an international audience, a really good set of a lot of sort of the stage setting. How are people feeling?
Yep.
If I'm a product manager, which hey, I happen to be, but funny story. No, but and I think that's true. I get it. I understand. But how do I track? What should I be looking at to kind of signal when my users' feelings are evolving so that I am meeting them where they are now?
That's a great question. The big thing that I would do is don't rely on a single way of tracking attitudes. So number one, you want to be sure that you're getting both quant and qual information. So that's why we've been doing this stuff, right? With both doing surveys, which we're not a survey company. We're paying a third party company, same ones that you guys would normally do to do surveys on your own. We're working through them to do the quantitative surveying type of thing because it's really important to get a numerical baseline on what people are saying about things. But that alone, so you could survey your customers to say, "Hey, how are you feeling about this? What are you thinking?" If you're not doing that, you really should be. Um, but that's only one piece of it, because it won't tell you why they're feeling that way, and it won't help you anticipate how their thinking is evolving. And you may make assumptions about how they're thinking that could be completely wrong. So the other thing is you need to be doing structured conversations with them where you get them to talk about these things. And it could be as simple as taking the same questions that you ask in a survey, but saying to them in a situation where they can talk back to you, "Hey, tell me how you would answer this question and then explain why. Tell me what you're thinking behind that. What makes you feel that way? Is there anything you'd like to add that you weren't able to put across when you answered that little numerical question?" You can do those sorts of conversations through our system. Obviously, we'd love you to do that. User tests are really good for that. But there are lots of other ways you can do it as well. But just please make sure you're not doing just the numbers alone, or frankly, not just the conversations either, because you'll get a much richer picture if you do both. The other thing I want you to be really super cautious about is don't be over reliant on social listening. There are lots of wonderful tools today that let you collect and collate what people are saying online on Facebook and Twitter and other places like that. And that's valuable. You don't want to ignore it. So that's another data point that I think is good to get. But you've got to take it with a big grain of salt, because the average person who posts comments online does not think the same way as the average person in general in the population. The people who post stuff online are generally the ones who are the most highly motivated, meaning that they might be the most excited about your stuff, but they might also be the angriest. Um, they tend to be kind of fanatics in either direction. They tend to be sometimes a little bit narcissistic, because that's one of the things that motivates people to do stuff online is they like to hear themselves talk. The big thing to understand is that they are self-selected, and they are not a typical proper sample of your average customer. So if you overemphasize the stuff that you're hearing through social listening, you will overreact to issues. You will overmanage the details. You may overly complicate things because you'll get very detailed feedback from these people that goes beyond the interests of regular customers. And that's true, not just about the pandemic, that's true about everything. It's true about society in general. Our society sounds like we're a lot more conflicted than we actually are. People are not as angry as they appear to be based on what you hear on Twitter and Facebook, because the angriest people are posting there. So you can really skew your perspective if you do too much social listening. Don't dismiss it. You need to respond to it. Hey, because those people can set opinions about you. So you need to be dealing with them. But never mistake what you hear on social media for the real world. They are very different things, and you can really screw yourself up if you overfocus on it.
All really good points, Mike. And I think another thing that you and I had talked about before too is as you've delved in and understand your users and what matters to them, there are markers in the world that you can help watch, right? So if
Yeah.
yeah, vaccines I think is one that you had brought up that was a really interesting sort of external marker that can help you start to predict when people will get to different levels of comfort.
Yep. And so thank you. That's a beautiful segue, because this is a great one for people to be thinking about. So I would love to be able to tell you exactly when life is going to go back to normal. Like, when is everybody going to all of a sudden resume their normal lifestyles? And a lot of the companies I talk with want to know that. And it is impossible to answer that question directly. Because it depends on too many things that are not predictable. What you can do, though, is you can ask customers what needs to happen before you're going to be willing to go back to your normal lifestyle. And then you get some great markers to watch for in terms of, oh, okay, when XYZ happens, then they're going to be ready to move. And so I can just track the status of those things. So we ask that, what needs to happen before you're going to be willing to go back to your normal lifestyle? And the number one answer was the same in every single country. It was when most people have been vaccinated. Next after that, in most places, was when the health experts say that it's safe and when the reported rate of infection drops. In Australia and Singapore, they also said very highly ranked when the government tells me that it's safe. That was ranked much lower in the US and the UK. And I think the reason is because Australia and Singapore have been more effective at containing the disease. The infection rates are much lower there. And as a result, the government has a lot more credibility. In the US, the government saying, hey, it's safe to go back and resume your normal lifestyle, that's probably going to move maybe a third of the population. The other 2/3 are going to go, nope, I don't really believe you. I'm going to wait until my doctor says it's safe. And more to the point, I'm going to wait until I've been vaccinated and most of the people around me have been vaccinated. So that's the way it is. By the way, the current baseline across all the countries we talk to, about 20% of the population says that they're ready to go back to their normal lifestyle now. So that's nice. That's 20%, but that means the other 80% are not ready to resume their normal lifestyle at this point in time. And so the first thing, the most important thing to track is the rate of vaccination. And the faster that moves, and as long as we continue to get reports of the vaccines working, and so far that's been good, the faster that moves, the better people are going to feel. Now, there's a follow-on question, which is, okay, how willing are people to take the vaccine, right? Because maybe if they're all anti-vaxxers and they're terrified of the vaccine and they're going to refuse to take it, then we're going to be stuck for a while waiting. It's going to be a chicken and egg thing. On that one, there's good news, which is the rate of willingness to take the vaccine has been going up over time. So we've been tracking that over time. As of now, in the United States, half the population says they will take the vaccine immediately as soon as it's offered to them, which is great. In the UK, it's about 40%, so it's a little bit lower. Actually, the rate is interesting. It's lower in Australia and Singapore. It's down around a third. A lot more people want to wait. But again, remember, that's because they're at less risk. The pandemic is much more contained there, so they're feeling like there's less of an incentive to go get the shot. Whereas in the US, it's like, oh, just give me the darn thing. Let me get this over with so I can get back to my normal life. So I think as the vaccine becomes available, crossing my fingers, it looks like we may actually get better uptake of it than we were worried about previously. So that's really good news.
Great. I think the other thing that's interesting, and it is driven by one of the questions in your survey, there's the aspect of how comfortable and how confident you're feeling, and then there's the aspect of, now that you're feeling confident, what are you anxious to do, and what are you really excited to, and what are you willing to wait? Like, what are the first things when you feel comfortable you're going to want to do? And
Yep.
because I think that has real implications on when people are going to re-engage with different products.
Yeah. What will they do first? What's all the pent up demand for things? And so we tried to get at that. It's hard to tell what people will actually do, because they're just saying what they want to do. But again, this is all about just getting inside their heads and understand what they're thinking about. So it varies from country to country. It was interesting. It was different. In the US, the top ones were I want to go out and eat in a restaurant. So that was number one. Number two was I want to leave my home without wearing a mask. I think we can all see that one pretty well. The third one is going on a vacation inside the country. So a lot of pent up demand for travel. And by the way, for the US, going on a vacation outside the country was also high. It just wasn't as high as going on a vacation inside the country. Um, in the UK, similar rankings on stuff, um, but more people ranked international vacation high. And that's not surprising because UK, you're right next to Europe. It's more normal to do a holiday in Spain or something like that. And so a lot of people want to get back to doing that. Um, in Australia, number one and number two were going on vacations, or as they would call it, holiday, either internationally or in country. And in Singapore, going on an international trip was number one. So, so number one, now, one thing to understand for Singapore and Australia, they can already do some other things like going to the movies and eating in restaurants because there isn't as much vaccines, or pardon me, as much COVID. So it's not as high on their list because they're not actually deprived of it right now. I was so jealous when I was reading the results because it was like, oh, there are places where people like routinely go out to restaurants and stuff like that. And it was just, okay, yeah, I want to get me the vaccine. I really want to get back to that. Um, but across all these countries, the big theme was travel, 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 travel. Tons of people want to do that. Um, so we also gave them an open-ended thing at the end to say, hey, is there anything else you want to add on this question? And out of the interviews and stuff. The really touching thing was we hadn't thought to put this on the list for the survey, but a huge number of people said the thing they're looking to the most is I want to hug my friends and family. And that was like, oh man, you know, kind of reminds you of the emotional side of this whole thing and and how much emotionally people are suffering. And I think for all of us as product managers and marketers, we do need to be cognizant of the economic impacts, the hard physical things that people can and can't do, and what they're looking forward to doing. But there's also just the emotional stress that's on people and the need for feeling the relief and the relaxation of being able to go back to normal human interactions. That's a really, really important one. Um, how that affects your product and your business is going to vary tremendously based on what business you're in. But keep in mind that just as important as the practical elements of this stuff, there is an enormous emotional component to it that is super important to all of our customers.
It's so true. And it's so true to your point too, where I think that part you can't lose how important that connection is when you look at all the other results,
Yep.
because what they want to do when they can really has nothing to do with your product and everything to do with a feeling of normalcy, but more important, a feeling of intimacy
Yeah.
with those they've been missing.
Yep. Absolutely.
But on the, I think if we were not, if I was my product manager and I'm not thinking about my product and I'm thinking about my own professional career, right?
Yes.
Lots of people worked remotely prior to COVID. Pretty much everybody worked, worked remotely afterwards, and something pieces in between. And I think that particularly with the vaccine and there's starting to be a light, there's lots of discussion and questions about, you know, what will it look like after this? Are we going back? Does going back to normal and my desire to go back to normal mean the same thing in my professional life? Do I want to go back full time? I mean, you see hugely different, um, thoughts from the different tech leaders, from saying, "Geez, there's nothing good about remote," to being like, "Hey, it's all good. We should maybe just do all of this." Right? There's a
Yep.
really different school of thoughts. I'd love. I know you guys dug a little bit into this as well, but kind of what did your survey say about what people are either hoping for or expecting? I'm not sure which way you guys went
Yeah.
in terms of post COVID and how that meant for us as working folk.
Yep. Yep. It's been really, really interesting. And it was cool, by the way, to do the international version of this, the most recent time, because it turned out to be almost exactly the same in every single country, which is really, really striking. So I'll give you the numbers first, and then let's talk about why and what they mean. So the question was asked that we asked them was, before the pandemic, were you working all the time outside of the house? Were you working part-time at home and part-time at an office or other location? Or were you working full-time from home? And then we asked, after the pandemic ends, what would you like to do? Same choices. What we found was the majority of people prior to the pandemic, up to about between 50 and 50% and two-thirds, said that they were working full-time outside of the home. They were never working from home. And then some were working part-time from home and part-time in office, and some were working full-time at home, contractors, people like that. Post-COVID, what they would like if their employers let them do it, was it was a certain number want to work full-time from home. It's about maybe a quarter, something like that. Um, Another 20%, 25% um, want to work or expect to work full-time outside of the home. And then the majority of people want to work um, part-time at home and part-time in the office. Now the piece, so that's the numbers, is so the move is very decisively away from working full-time outside the home, and it's toward part-time home and office, with some people saying full-time home, an increased number saying full-time home. The background behind that is that there are the people who said that they want to work outside the home. Some of them it's that they want to go to an office, but most of them it's because their chosen career doesn't let them operate at home and they really want to get back to work. So I work in retail. I'm a teacher. Um, I'm a construction worker. I don't want to do that at home. I can't possibly do that at home. I've got to. I want to get back to work, and I look forward to getting back to work full time. For the people who are knowledge workers or whatever you want to call them, people who could potentially do the job at home, most of them want to do it at home part time. And when we probe with them on why do they view it that way? They actually tell us very elaborate stories. They've been thinking about this stuff clearly because they've got a whole scenario in their heads. And it usually runs something like this. Well, I can be more efficient on collaboration if I go to the office. And that's the place where I can brainstorm with my coworkers best and we can establish ties and we can do that stuff. So I want to do that a couple times a week. And literally some people have it down to, I want to do that 2 days a week and then 3 days a week at home. And others go, I want to be 1 day a week at the office and 4 days a week at home and stuff like that. They've really mapped it out. But then they say about the time in the office, what they say is, well, I'm always getting interrupted. I can't focus. I've found that I'm much more productive when I'm working at home. I actually get more done. Plus, I'm more relaxed. So I want to spend 2 days a week in the office and I'm going to really focus on networking there. I want to spend 3 days a week at home and I'm going to focus on being productive there. And I can do my job better if I have that balance than if I go back to the office. And people are really, really strong on this. Now, the question is, will the employers allow them to do that? And we haven't surveyed them on that. We've just been surveying the employees and asking them. What I expect is that we're going to see an ongoing negotiation. Um, but I can tell you the companies that offer that sort of flexibility, that plan for it, that maybe plan out, hey, here are the 2 days a week that we're all going to be in the office, and here are the 3 days a week that you can work from home. So it's all coordinated, that sort of stuff. Those companies are likely to attract the best employees. This is going to become a thing of, hey, if the salary is the same, I'll work at the place that gives me more flexibility on location now that I know how to manage that. So I think ultimately competition between employers is going to drive us toward this sort of mixed mode, sometimes in the office and sometimes at home. I My gut is that that's going to be a permanent change for a lot of industries.
Yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting. You called it an ongoing negotiation because I find that really interesting. Like, I would be hard pressed to see a lot of organizations set a line in the sand and be like, "All right, everybody goes back in the office at this point." But you do wonder, long term, will the patterns slide one way or the other? Right?
Yeah.
Will we
Yep.
forget that this did work and there were some definite efficiency plans go, and you just kind of go back to the norm, or have we? At this point, I do. My hypothesis is it's gone on long enough that
Yeah.
maybe it's long enough for the whole sort of mental model around it to have switched. Right? If you
Yep.
went back in May, like we all thought in our, because we didn't understand anything,
Yeah.
go in March and we'll be like, we're back by May. That may not have been long enough to make people
Yeah.
really get it. But It is interesting. And then you also just see at a personal and national level a lot of movement, right? If I'm going to
Yeah.
work from home, where my home is very different. And I think particularly on the coast, you see
Yeah.
people thinking about the more space they can get, the cost savings if they go elsewhere, and if those
Yep.
same great jobs are available to them, but with the view of, the Tetons, uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. Why not if you can do it? And I can tell you myself personally, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was riding public transit to get to work every day, and my commute was more than an hour and a half in each direction.
Wow.
I'm never going to go back to doing that full time unless I have to. I mean, it's amazing the difference in just, you know, energy levels not having to cope with all that garbage. And so that's me, and I'm trying to really be careful about keeping me separate from the research so that I'm not biasing it. But it's just when you hear this stuff from the people you're talking to and you're feeling it yourself, it really kind of reinforces that stuff. The other thing I should add though is it's up to us to make it work. And by us, I mean all of us as a society. If if we all start treating working at home as an opportunity to slack off and not be productive, then it's not going to work. And we'll end up back in the office with the regular rat race. So it's not just that employers need to be flexible, it's also that all of us as workers, if we're going to do that thing of saying, hey, trust me to work from home, we need to actually deliver.
You
And
know,
so this is a journey we're all going on together, and it's up to us to make it work if we wanted to.
I've thought about that as well, right? For the person who, for the only time I've worked full time at home in my career is during this time.
Mhm.
And one of the things about the pandemic is it sure does instill good work habits for you, because there's nowhere for me to go, right? It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll just go run some errands at break, right?
Yep.
And I think there's that. And I think for a lot of people, we're very fortunate, both of us, but there's a heightened concern about employment, right? With
Yep.
the
Yeah.
economy. And so
Yeah.
that was the second driver to really put in good. There's nowhere to go. And like you just felt fortunate because you were watching other people around you lose their position. So you're really going to double commit. And I do think it did help us set some really good structures in place. That, to your point, we do have to be good citizens as more options are available to us, or good employee citizens, right?
Yep.
Um, to feather in that flexibility that you should be able to take advantage with the work ethic that is required to keep this as a viable option.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing we should add about working at home is people with kids at home. That's a special situation. If you know, okay, working from home is dependent in part on having the kids back in school, because taking care of the kids full time and making sure they get educated when they're learning from home at the same time as you're trying to work from home, that is a miserable experience for a lot of parents, and that's not sustainable long term.
It's tough as the mother of a fifth grader. It is tough on my husband and
Yeah.
I, and it's tough on her, right? It's hard all day long if you're
Yeah.
grinding out, for her to come over for help and for me to have to be like, I can't help you now. I can't help you now. So I have a
Yeah.
little sign that goes up that means that you can't interrupt me. It's a picture of her that says I'm her number one fan. And then you have to
Oh.
figure out there's enough meetings in your life that, you know what, if I'm meeting with my team and she needs to ask me a question, that signs that up, because
Yep.
I have to give her space.
Yeah.
It can't be for, 10 hours a day, just pretend I'm not here.
Yeah.
but
Absolutely.
it is definitely an extra layer. And I have one and she's in fifth grade, and I can't imagine the younger kids. I can't imagine multiples. So it's,
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we've interviewed some of those folks, and they're frazzled. They're just totally frazzled, and I really feel for them. And that's been a true thing throughout the pandemic
yeah.
is one person will be sailing through just fine, and another person will be suffering, and you don't know. So you just have to be really careful about making assumptions. But the good news is once the kids are back in school, then this starts to feel a lot more workable. Like,
Mhm.
okay, I can be at home. It's quiet. I can plan my, super productive during these hours when the kids are in school. And then when they're back, I can kind of split time a little bit. It's like you can see a path to where that can
Yeah.
work. But it's again up to all of us to make it work.
Yeah. And I also think you make a good point there too. And I always try to remind myself, I totally understand everyone's point of view about like should the kids go back? Should they stay home? Can I do this? Is it sustainable? It depends on so many factors,
Yep.
including just your network, your house structure, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, a million different things, much of which someone doesn't have control over, and every
Oh,
version of
yeah.
that is is acceptable, for lack of a better word.
When you said house structure, you reminded me of a really interesting. Can I jump to a little thing that we learned from Singapore?
Absolutely.
So people in Singapore, much more than the other countries, are willing to go along with a lot of the government regulations on, like, hey, don't stand too close to each other, wear your masks. Um, uh, you know, uh, those tables in that restaurant cannot be too close together. That stuff is rigorously enforced there, and they're not resentful of it. And I asked some folks in Singapore about that to try to understand. There's the stereotype of, oh well, Asian country, they're more compliant, et cetera, et cetera. That's not it. What it is all the apartments in Singapore are really, really tiny, and they were locked down for a little while, and it was miserable because you're locked in this tiny little apartment with no backyard and you can't go outside. And it was a horrible experience. It's like being in jail.
Oh.
And so they are very willing to accept all sorts of public restrictions because they don't have a nice house with a backyard to go
Hmm.
to the way a lot of Americans do. They're cooped up in a tiny little apartment in a high rise. And so it's a lot of the differences in reactions are not driven by some sort of nebulous, semi-racially based cultural bias thing. It's just the natural conditions that they're in. How's the country structured? And once you understand that, then their reactions are very, very understandable. It's very logical. Hey, my apartment's tiny. I don't want to be cooped up. I'll accept lots more restrictions on what I do in public. Makes sense.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, we have talked about a lot of different things today, and it's been great. If you could get our listeners to do two things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would that be?
Yep. So, number one, um, have an ongoing dialogue with your customers about when will they resume their normal patterns of behavior. Find out the things that have changed relative to your business. I presume you know that already, but just be sure. And as you're tracking those things, track them through a multiple number of different ways. Don't just rely on a single metric. Don't rely on just quant stuff. Don't rely on just qual conversations. Be doing all of them and be actively comparing back and forth what's going on with those things. That's number one. Number two, in terms of tracking what's going on in society, track the rate of vaccination because that is kind of the gold standard. Assuming nothing big changes with how the vaccines are working, but assuming they continue to work, track the rate of vaccination because that is the thing that's going to be most effective at giving you a proxy for when will people be looking to go back to their usual behaviors.
Awesome. All right, Mike, if people want to reach you or learn more about any of this research and about user testing, how should they do it?
They can just send me an email. That's the easiest way. So I'm just mike@usertesting.com, Mike, and drop me a note. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to hear some more details on the numbers that came out of the survey and stuff, this is all fresh. We haven't written up the white paper yet, but we're going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks. So I will put you on the list to receive that. And you're also welcome to follow up with me with exact questions and stuff like that. I would be delighted to hear from anybody who's got questions.
Excellent. Mike, it was a genuine pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise, I really enjoyed it.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help elevate your product, your company, and your career.